Hey everyone, this is Andrew, and this is my first look at the Arturia MiniBrute 2S. Now I have fooled around with it a little bit for about 5 minutes the other day after I took it out of the box, but I kind of wanted to get my first impressions trying to figure out how to use this thing. So right now I have it sitting on my desk, and I have my complete control, S61 Mark II hooked up to it for MIDI control. However, I do also have it set that you can use these pads. My first impression is that this thing sounds great, by the way, just to get that out of the way, but thought we could fool around with some of the settings. So this thing does have two oscillators, I believe. VCO1 here and VCO2 here, and you can tune them with respect to each other, which can make some awesome sounds. Slightly out of tune square waves, although take out oscillator 2. It gives that nice analog sound where two oscillators are, just slightly out of tune. The nice thing about analog oscillators is that even when they're perfectly in tune, they're never really perfectly in tune. So you get this really thick kind of beat kind of sound. Sounds absolutely huge. Now, one cool thing I noticed is that in addition to just having the oscillators being generated by themselves, you can kind of fade and blend different oscillators. So if I turn all these down, you just hear oscillator 2, which right now it's set to a square wave. So I can set it to a sine, which kind of makes a sub-bass tone. And then I can fade in a saw for oscillator 1. Sounds great. Then I can blend in some square, blend in some triangle, blend in some noise. Sounds great. Now, I can actually look into doing some different stuff with my filter here. So far what I figured out, by the way, I tend to not read manuals. I haven't even actually ripped the tape off of this thing. I'll probably leave that on until it falls to pieces. But I believe this is for the filter and this AD envelope is for the sound. So I bring this up. Attack is longer. And that's about the max setting for attack. Bring that down, bring the decay up. And it's a pretty long decay there, or release, I guess, in the setting. So I'll get that down. I'll play with that. Now, I believe this is for the filter. So if I have this up, and just so you know, this FM here, I'm not sure why it's called FM. I think it's FM stands for frequency modulation. Usually you apply that for FM for the oscillators. I think FM here just means it's using the modulation of the ADSR to control the cutoff frequency. So it kind of is frequency modulation, just not in the traditional sense. I may be wrong about that, but just without reading the manual, that's my understanding of it. So if I turn this to the middle, these sliders actually do nothing. But then if I turn it up, right now they're all down, so it kind of does nothing. If I add an attack, no release, so if I do that, there's no sustain. Add some nice decay and set the sustain down. I'm going to make this a little more subtle. nice. Now another thing I can do is I can actually loop this. I think this loops this one though. Yeah, it just loops this envelope. So that's not what I want to do. I think this resonance modulation is controlled by LFO1. You can see here this light is flashing. I believe that is visible on the camera. So that's the speed of LFO1, and that's modulating the resonance. You can make this more of a noise LFO. Or this is actually, I think, a sample and hold. That's pretty interesting. Now I can go to this noise one. So I believe what's happening here is that this one all the way down the bottom on now is, you know, it's just generating noise. So there's kind of just a random fluctuation of values for the LFO. When I go here, it's stepping that noise because it's kind of sampling and holding at the rate that you specify. I go here, I have a square wave. I go here, a saw, triangle, and sine wave. Sounds great. Now, these little blue things are what's pre-wired into the unit. Now, that doesn't mean that that's all you can do, because you do have this patch bay over here, which I'm not even going to cover in this video, because I haven't even got there yet. This synth is very dense in terms of what it offers. Just playing around with this alone gives you kind of unlimited capability. You add this patch bay, and it's just crazy what you can do with this thing. If I switch this down to negative, my ADSR here will apply in the opposite direction. So it dips down. If I make this really high, I'm actually going to turn down the volume on the input just in case I get some clipping as I'm experimenting here. Sick. So, now that I'm generating, if I use just a square wave and I turn off Oscillator 2 here, I do have a pulse width modulation that is being controlled by LFO1, at least that's what it's pre-patched to do. So let me actually turn this off. So now I just have kind of a pure square wave. Set that in the middle. You can hear I'm getting some pulse width modulation that's determined by this LFO. Make it a triangle wave. And now let's blend in Oscillator 2. Right now Oscillator 2 is a sine wave and it's kind of acting like a sub-bass, but if I add this, the reason why I say it's acting like a sub-bass is because when it's a sine wave, it's so pure that it's kind of not really impacting the tone as much as it is, whereas if there was a double of the square wave. When you add the sine wave, it just sounds like this super low frequency. So I turn this down. It sounds like a sub-bass, so that's why I'm calling it a sub-bass. If I go to square wave, now we get that sound. Now they're at the same frequency. kind of jamming on the sound a little bit. So now let's get out of the bass territory, and I'll go up a couple octaves. Let's try to get some kind of cool lead sound. I'm just going to continue to play around like I was before. So let's get out of the square wave domain, and let's go into the saw domain. So I have a saw for oscillator 2, saw for oscillator 1, and I kind of want to mess with this brute factor. Ooh, that's adding some gnarly distortion. So let's mess around with this ultra saw. It's doing something with this. Let me turn this to a triangle wave. You can see there's some kind of pulsation that happens in time with this light here. So I don't know what ultra saw mount really does, but being driven by LFO2. Sounds neat. Let's turn on this metalizer. There's nothing. Maybe I need this on. I don't really notice that does anything. It does say it's velocity dependent. Although my keyboard should be giving velocity information. I don't really know how that mixes in with this particular synth. Not much of a keyboard player, really. That's me trying, at least. Let's bring in some noise, and let's get back to kind of like a bass type setting. Oh, yeah. Now let's give this filter some kind of rise here. Too much. Let's bring this down, make this more subtle. I'm going to give us a very long attack and a very long release. And a big decay, and also sustain down to something much lower. Let's bring the resonance down, and I'll modulate it via LFO1 here, which is going pretty slow. A little more dramatic. Too much on the noise. Let's make this oscillator a little more out of tune. I want this to sustain at a higher frequency, so we'll boost that. And then I'll make my attack on my VCA a little higher, or a little longer rather. Even longer. Make my decay in the filter longer. Sustain a little higher, boost that a bit. I'm kind of maxing out almost everything here. That sounds incredible. I'll try going octave down, see how crazy it sounds. Now I think my keyboard is actually hitting an octave note that's outside the range of the synthesizer. So I'll stay where I was before. Love that. Absolutely love that. Now that frequency difference from VCO to VCO2 is becoming a little more apparent in the higher registers. There we go. This is what's causing that. Actually, I think it's the PWM. It's causing that oscillation. What has an LFO applied to it? Oh, that actually might just be the tuning. Yeah, it's the tuning. Ha! Let's look at this and bring it an octave down. Now I have a note that's tuned to a different octave here. And I don't know what this does. That's a global tuning knob, as it says. Let's do a LFO. Oh, that is interesting. I'm kind of playing chords like this. Make it more plucky. Now, obviously, it's not tuned to any key, so that difference doesn't necessarily always sound good. Still sounds pretty cool, and there are scenarios where you want to do that. Bring back that sub-bass feeling. I'm in saw mode right now. Glide to some extent. Way too much glide. Alright, so I've been rambling for about 20 minutes now, so I think I'm going to call it there. I think this gives a pretty good introduction to what this synth can offer. Now, I only covered essentially just this section of the synthesizer, which is just the basic controls. I didn't cover anything with the patch bay. I didn't cover anything with this whole bottom thing here. So this whole bottom area is essentially, you know, this is kind of a little controller so you can play it, but really it's supposed to be used as a sequencer. And I believe there is a certain way where you can actually not only just control the notes in the sequencer, but you can actually sequence certain events associated with the synthesizer. Like I think you can sequence the filter, or sequence the ultrasaw amount. I'm not exactly sure how that all works because I haven't been playing around with it yet. But at the end of the day, you can program patterns, you can program a BPM, and you can have several kind of tracks. Now it still doesn't make it more than a 2-oscillator synthesizer, but it allows you to make a pattern of a very unique and diverse sound. This whole patchbay thing here, just glossing over it very quickly, you can patch. Oh, sorry, I hit a note there. You can patch in the usual kind of things you'd expect, like from the Mother 32. It's kind of the same idea. Whereas for oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, you can have pitches going in. Let's say you have a piece of Eurorack gear that can send 1 volt per octave information you want to send to VCO1 and something else to VCO2. I believe that can all be done. You have outputs for your saw, square, triangle, noise waves. You can patch everything just on here, but it's also good for sending out to external gear. You have stuff associated with your filter, your amp. There's an inverter. If you want to invert a signal, you can pop something in, and then the output will be inverted. You can do trigger the ADSR. You can trigger the AD. There's also some controls for actually controlling the attack and decay. There's an output, so maybe you want to take that output of the ADSR and send that to the VCA instead of using the AD to control the VCA. There's a VCA area here. There's an attenuverter area here. Now I'm not sure how it's controlled, but it's there. There is some functionality for the sequencer to sync stuff. There's a run control if you have a certain, I don't know the specific voltage it requires, but you can send a certain voltage into run or sync, and that'll control it. There's a clock input. Sorry, this run is actually an output. So I guess you can control other information with that. You send an output sync and an output run. And I'm guessing that does something with the sequencer, whereas when you hit play on the sequencer, it'll send a play voltage to whatever you're trying to control, and it'll sync it with a clock. You could also do a clock input, and then there's a reset input to reset the sequencer. LFO 1 and 2, there are outputs for those to send to other gear, or maybe to route to somewhere else on this patch bay. And then there's MIDI information. I think the keyboard out, not exactly sure. I think that's volt per octave. Whereas if you have a MIDI cable plugged into here, this is a little MIDI CV converter essentially. So when you click a note, that 1 volt per octave information gets sent from this keyboard output. The gate voltage gets sent out of this gate voltage output. Velocity / mod, and then pressure / mod. I'm guessing one is the velocity, whereas how hard you hit the note, and pressure I'm not entirely sure. There may be a way to assign those to make them associated with the mod wheel. So yeah, anyways, that's the quick and dirty look at the Arturia MiniBrute 2S. This thing is awesome, and I can see myself using it in some of my next upcoming projects. Next time I have a song, this will probably be the first thing that I want to throw in there to experiment. Because recently, I got the Behringer Model D, and that was something that right after I got it, I started throwing it into every song that I was currently working on, just because I could. Makes a good... Having synthesizers like this is very useful, because every synthesizer has a different organization and different features, and it allows you to think a little differently. The sounds, pretty much every analog synthesizer you can buy nowadays is going to be great. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't be on the market very long. But it's nice having a couple different ones so that when you have a song, you might usually just throw in some kind of VST, but it's nice to have something analog and new and interesting that you can control and play with and to spice up your songs a bit. So anyways, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe for more. I upload videos every single Friday, and I'll see you in the next one.